Welcome to Biota Live. I'm Tom Barbalet, and this is being recorded live on TalkShoe, November 21st, 2009. This is one of the Saturday morning Biota Live formats. It's currently just 9:45, coming up to the 10 a.m., and it's wonderful to have a number of folks in the chat room who we normally don't get in the evening Biota Lives. I think what I'm going to start doing is probably doing these artificial life work group related Biota Lives on a Saturday morning because the participation is just wonderful. We already have Gerald de Jong in the chat room, Ryan Flanagan, and also Bob, who's the creator of Crediting. And certainly, Bob, we've promoted Crediting through Biota Live, through a number of Biota Lives, thanks to Eric Burton. So it's wonderful to have you participating in Biota Live through the chat and in the Biota community. So with regards to news and notes, I don't really have a lot of news and notes aside from the work group. Obviously, the pace has picked up through the past 2 weeks with regards to the work group. The course list is looking rather splendid. I think we probably have more than about 30 courses internationally listed currently, and a number are being added every day or so. I get probably 2 or 3 emails a day with regards to updates, which is how we populated the course list with so many courses so far. But now the hard work actually begins. What we are going to have to do is go through the course list and actually try to survey, get a broad sense of what is being taught as artificial life the world over. My original thought was almost that it would be like a Venn diagram, that you would have a series of papers, a series of topics that would be taught in a number of the artificial life courses, and we could kind of develop almost a map of what was being taught in the artificial life courses the world over. But the more that I actually go through the courses, the more that I see that really what we should do is probably just create a kind of outer circular limits associated with the papers and the topics that are being covered, because I don't think even amongst 3 or 4 of the courses there is even a group of shared topics and papers. So what it's showing is really what Larry Yeager was talking about in the last Biota Live, that there's so many different topics that are being taught currently as artificial life, and it would be wonderful to put them all together. And that's really the next job of the academic special interest group, the academic SIG that's been set up as part of the work group, is to go through the courses and get a broad kind of spectrum of what is being taught as artificial life curriculum, with the view that once that is all brought together, it will be something that students can look at, but also academics that are either considering or currently teaching artificial life or artificial life-related courses, they can go to a central location and see, oh, that's really interesting. You know, someone's doing some kind of deeper philosophy or some wet artificial life or sociology even and psychology. It's quite amazing what is being taught, and also the various schools that are taking it on. I mean, you'd imagine computer science, possibly biology, and now philosophy, cognitive science. It's amazing the diversity of folk, obviously informatics as well, that are teaching artificial life, and I think the surveying is presenting what we originally anticipated with regards to forming the work group in terms of just the sheer diversity. There are some areas that are lacking, in South America in particular, and I don't want to say non-English language speaking courses, but there are certainly sections in the course list that are lacking, and I'm very mindful from the VITA folk that were involved, Nell and Sally Jane in previous Biota podcasts, that the artistic artificial life community, Vida Artificial, is the term in both Spanish and Portuguese for artificial life. And there's a large community there that we may not actually be currently surveying through the work group. So I send a request out to the broader Biota Live listening audience that if you know of artificial life courses that are being taught in South America or in the Portuguese or Spanish-speaking world, please get in contact. Let me know where the courses are being taught. Even if you don't have links, even if you don't have specific information, if you just have a university or a name or a sense that there is an artificial life course being taught out there, please contact me, tom@noble8.com. I will put it into the course list, particularly if there's search stuff that's needed. And it would be wonderful to get a broad surveying going. So that's the academic special interest group. There is also an industrial special interest group, a media special interest group, and an arts special interest group. And through the industrial special interest group, I talked about this last Biota Live as being a group that was not particularly well populated. Well, it turns out I probably should have checked the mailing list statistics before I made that claim, because there were a number of folk there. However, Stephen from the last podcast posted yesterday some interesting information with regards to what they're actually using at Redfish in terms of artificial life software, open source software, these kind of things, the kind of thing that really folks such as myself and Gerald de Jong and other folks who develop programs that are intended in some regard to be used in academia or in education could have a look at what's currently being used in industry and get a sense of what needs to be done in order to move their particular projects in that direction. I know personally I'm doing a lot of work currently with regards to Apple, and it's interesting actually tracking the practical nature of developing artificial life software when you're developing it in maybe in concert or maybe in contrast with regards to a large company. And certainly that is something that I'm memorializing in my writing currently, because I think this kind of information is really critical. And my hope is through the industry special interest group and also the academic special interest group, these kind of things can be tracked. So obviously what is being taught in universities also benefits industry. There is not a hobbyist special interest group within the work group. I think probably the hobbyist community is actively represented through the collection, including obviously the art special interest group. So my sense is probably that there's no real need for a hobbyist special interest group as part of the work group, but it may come in the foreseeable future. So interesting feedback from Stephen. If you are interested in what is being done with artificial life in industry, Stephen's email provides a particular direction that he's using artificial life for in his own work. And if you look at his sites, and there are a number of startups that he's involved with, you get a sense of what I would consider probably the late 90s element of artificial life as part of broader visualization, as part of broader modeling and simulation science. And that's certainly where I came from with Noble Ape as well. I think a number of the applications that Stephen is using currently in terms of visualization and modeling are things certainly that I considered early on in the development of Noble Ape, and maybe others have as well. I know Breve is used for that kind of stuff too. So it's always good to have these kind of points, particularly when you're starting to talk about how academia and possibly even the hobbyist community can move to better serve the needs of industry and vice versa. I mean, potentially some feedback from industry as well. So the plan for today's show was to discuss a philosophical problem, and it is the value problem as discussed previously, but something more specific associated with the value problem, how one should actually set about creating a solution to it. Because I think as a philosophical problem, the value problem can be a kind of cyclical, multi-philosopher participant discussion, but it doesn't actually net benefits for the stuff that we're talking about in industry or academia. And really, I think, particularly because of people such as Mark Biota and also Liz Swan, who I hope will be on the call today, the need for the philosophers to actually consider the applied ramifications of what artificial life is and how artificial life can grow both through industry, academia, all the stuff that we're talking about, I think could be driven by philosophy alone. Now, this is my own personal bent, and it's a matter for a debate. But the interesting thing that I wanted to frame in today's show was the idea that the value problem is an applied problem, and the way that it is philosophically dissected should be done or could be done in an engineering framework. We have Stephen on the line. I'll just bring him in. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, Tom. How are you doing?
Very well. So the topic for discussion today was to look at using engineering methods in order to solve the philosophical aspect of the value problem. And before we start talking about this, it was wonderful to get your email yesterday into the industry special interest group. Would you like to talk a little bit about the email and some of the tools that you use currently and the kind of historical legacy of the artificial life tools that you've used?
Sure, and I apologize for being late to the call. Who else is in here?
No one else is in here currently. I'm waiting for Liz Swan to call in so we can talk about the main topic.
Oh, very good. So one of the questions was, how are we using maybe Swarm or Breve or Framsticks? And my response was, we used Swarm in the early or the late 90s, and then maybe for 5 or 6 years in 2000 to 2005, we're writing our own agent-based modeling toolkits that were very specific to different projects, but certainly weren't reusable or meant for kind of general use. And then kind of with the emergence of NetLogo and Repast, we're using these kind of toolkits, NetLogo in particular, for kind of rapid prototyping on the early parts of projects. And then depending on the requirements of a project, on how it has to be deployed, or what kind of data we need to integrate with, we'll tend to go back to rolling our own. Maybe if we have to use a lot more GIS or have different data visualization requirements. But it's really useful now to have things like NetLogo to rapidly prototype and also bring in. It's really easy to teach, so it's easy to bring in clients into the process of agent modeling, and also leave them with a tool set after we leave. And that said, I was just kind of cautioning that agent-based modeling is not probably strictly artificial life. It's a closely related field, and it's one of the tools of complex systems. And then I guess I talked about other tools in artificial life in addition to agent-based modeling would certainly be evolutionary computing and genetic algorithms and genetic programming, which we've used for optimization and search in operations research types of problems as you're looking at optimization of flow on networks and things like that. And then just, I guess, the last point in the email was pointing out that maybe evolutionary computation kind of characterized a lot of the research, from my perspective, in artificial life in the 90s, and in the last couple years, I've been very intrigued and interested in understanding artificial life more from the perspective of Stu Kaufman's autonomous agent idea, of which is a much more metabolic kind of approach to artificial life, defining living systems as systems that reproduce and do at least one thermodynamic work cycle. So if you look at all living systems on Earth anyway, participating in a Krebs or citric acid cycle, and then starting to understand living systems from more energetic flows and constraint construction, more than kind of the DNA, RNA, natural selection kind of approach.
Certainly. And I think, what you're talking about with regards to Stuart Kaufman's definition follows into the idea that intelligent agents in a simulated environment is certainly something that I would consider part of artificial life. Mm-hmm. So what you're describing with regards to the intelligent agent, and particularly within a simulated environment, is very much part of, I think, the contemporary definition of artificial life. So I don't know whether that would necessarily be controversial in academic circles, but certainly not part of the Biota community. We've accepted that term. And the stuff with regards to work cycles and energy modeling is really critical, obviously, with regards to intelligent agents and simulated environments. And what's interesting, if you look at discussions associated with inertia and these kind of things, I think the last, maybe it was A-Life 11 I think it was A-Life 11 that my mind's gone blank. There was a fellow at Sussex, quite a well-known fellow, who did a whole track at A-Life 11 associated with that kind of modeling. So I think these are all topics which are very much part of the contemporary artificial life community. And it's something which, as we describe the surveying of the course list, the idea of what artificial life is very much dynamic and continually evolving term. Yeah. And what you've described in a kind of historical context is actually the movement of the term through intelligent agents and probably now well beyond intelligent agents. We have Dick Gordon in the chat room asking to distill what the value problem is specifically. The simplest definition that I've given is the idea of how does an external observer, someone outside the artificial life community, perhaps even people that are listening in for the first time to Biota Live, how do they understand what the value of artificial life is, the intrinsic value, and how does this value motivate things like developments of uses in industry and also the broader teaching of artificial life, particularly if we could talk just about the academic part of that. There are a number of single artificial life courses that are taught as part of broader curriculums world over. This is what the course list is showing. But the problem is that there doesn't seem to be a track associated with 2 or 3 courses where you go through the very basics of artificial life in the initial course and then progressively move through, potentially also going in different directions. Interesting feedback that I received, I think, from Sally Jane Norman is that they are setting up an artificial life art track at Sussex. I may have gotten that information completely wrong, but it's an interpolation through a few emails that I received. So even within artificial life art, there seems to be a need to create academic teaching flow where folks will start with an introductory course and then move into particular areas associated with artificial life. So that's the motivation of the value problem in academia. In industry, it is what Stephen does on a daily basis. It is creating startups and also motivating large companies to start using artificial life in a very applied fashion, and also listening to what the current uses of artificial life are and strengthening them. And I think what our conversation has already highlighted this morning, Stephen, is that the definition of artificial life is relatively broad. And in fact, I think as it continues to broaden, there will be more things that are brought into the artificial life community. And what I was interested in discussing with Liz Swan today was the idea of simulation science as this kind of broader community. Stephen, are you familiar with the kind of simulation science movement? Is this something that you've encountered, and do you have any thoughts associated with it?
Yeah, I've heard it in different contexts, and so I guess I would characterize from how I've heard it is, or where it kind of distills down for me, kind of simulation has kind of been struggling to become a recognized third leg on a stool of science, from empirical research and experiment theory being the second, and now simulation being an equal partner, and taken kind of more, instead of just being a tool of one of the other two. If that is that's my understanding, but how are you characterizing it?
I think that's a beautiful characterization. In fact, that's probably the best characterization I've ever heard with regards to simulation science explicitly. My view tends to be slightly more convoluted with regards to this notion that things can actually come out of simulation rather than it just being a means of testing hypothesis. That actually that there's a broader underlying mathematics and philosophy which is really critical. In fact, I wrote about it in Dick Gordon's book last year. So Dick has been one of the primary contacts associated with this too. And I think this movement, certainly there are people that have come into the Biota community. Justin Lyon is probably the best example of this, that have been strong evangelists in industry for this idea that simulation science is here and it's very beneficial in both an applied fashion but also reaching back into academia. And certainly I think you're on the bleeding edge of that, Stephen, with regards to your work. I'm really quite interested in what you do. I mean, I've went through your websites last night, and I went through your websites in a kind of precursory fashion when you were on the call last. And this idea of the Stuart Kaufman definition from the Chris Langton definition, can you talk a little bit about those two distinctions?
So the Chris Langton definition, you'd have to help me with. Is that life as it could be?
The Chris Langton definition is, in fact, extraordinarily broad, but it's life as it could be that then kind of splinters off into all possible directions. In fact, it's still a very popular definition because it encompasses basically what we've already discussed associated with artificial life. But I think the Stuart Kaufman, as you say, is very much focusing on it's kind of a macro view versus a micro view. That would be my distinction. But I think what interests me with the Stuart Kaufman definition, and the stuff that he's doing currently isn't really associated with his original definition, but his original definition related very much to, as you say, interaction, energy use, and also what it really fundamentally means to be alive as a kind of iterative process, as opposed to a kind of broad life as you see it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I guess I've answered my own question in that regard. But I mean, in terms of the Chris Langton definition, it really it pulls in possibilities and fields. And what interests me with the stuff that you guys are doing is that the agent component of that, which really Chris Langton's definition obviously covers, but Stuart Kaufman's refines, relates to not just abstract views of energy, but also chemical processes and things that you discussed initially. Can you expand a little bit about that?
Sure. So let me just also say that this is still kind of researchy and not. It certainly colors our perspective when we talk to firms when we're modeling a system. But the only place where it kind of trickles in right now in the applied way is we look from a perspective of what is it that's actually flowing through an organization and the type of work that an organization is doing that gives us a handle on what to model and these days what to visualize, because data is much more ubiquitous. So we can start actually with the visualization of data and using agent modeling to fill in the gaps. Where in the past we used to make a whole model of the whole system with a lot of different assumptions, and it was very difficult for to validate and to verify the models. But now we're starting a lot more with the data and the flows and again, looking at where there's gaps in the data and using modeling to fill it in. But in the Kaufman definition, is maybe in the email I wrote yesterday, one of the things I couldn't get a handle on in the beginning when I first, I was in his research group at BIOS Group, and I didn't really understand how to apply that to software and artificial life in particular. It definitely made sense in a physics, chemistry world, but what does that mean for software instantiations of artificial life? And not just the simulation side of artificial life, but actually, can you have living systems in the computer, or wet A life? I guess it was more applied, but certainly in the soft A life, can you actually realize an autonomous agent? I use autonomous agent in Stu's use kind of in capital A's, is different than, say, an agent in agent-based modeling, when agent-based modeling is a very simple computational entity, often almost like a finite state machine, that's interacting with other entities. And that is a very lowercase a, where Stu's autonomous agent is something that is actually detecting gradients and extracting work from the gradients and constructing constraints to maintain, to do further work. And so unpacking that kind of language was kind of maybe a couple years of thinking, what does work and heat mean in terms of software, not just simulating it, but can we talk about these kinds of ideas? And I think, there were some early handles where, a diffusion in software, if you have a bunch of random walkers radiating from a point, we do talk about that as a diffusion process in computing, and people are pretty comfortable with that, which is a heat process. And so one of the ways of defining that is agents, lowercase a agents, as they move randomly in their space, and they interact. So if an agent interacts with another agent and causes that agent to move randomly, that's the equivalent of a heat process. So definitions of, say, Peter Atkins has a nice popular book on the second law where he defines heat and work in a very intuitive way, whereas in undergraduate physics, I only got the symbolics and never really kind of got a handle on it. But he defines them both as processes. The only distinction being heat is the unconstrained transfer of energy, and work is the constrained transfer of energy. So it's all about how does action get transferred from one agent to another is the way I would kind of distill that down into a computational sense. So imagine two agents colliding again, and if it's a heat process, one agent will make another agent move randomly, and if it's a work process, it will transfer action into that agent in a biased degrees of freedom. So if an agent can move in 8, say, surrounding cells, and another agent will bias it to move in a particular couple of cells, with a higher probability. So we've looked at that, like, say, with the ant food foraging model, and tried to get these measures of work and heat and how they relate. And so when Stu talks about thermodynamic work cycles, it is, when you look at a heat engine, it is converting heat to work, which is something that to me has been interesting that we've only been able to do since the Industrial Revolution, as Atkins points out, whereas converting work to heat we've been able to do since, ever since we've been able to rub two sticks together or rub our hands together to be warm. That's more of a trivial transaction compared to all the constraints that are required to convert heat to work. So it's kind of a babble at this point. We are trying to formalize it, but it maybe gives you a sense of how we're trying to approach it.
And if we can distill the approach part of that, I remember reading Steve Grand's papers associated with the creation of creatures. We've had Steve Grand on Biota Live in the past. And this is interesting because what you're actually giving here is a third definition. I originally thought this was more like Steve Grand's approach, but I'll describe Steve Grand's approach. When I started developing Noble Ape, my background is physics. It was a point, the apes were points in space. The energy was applied to them in very discrete units, and the movement was effectively point in space movement. When Steve Grand created the norms, he created the chemistry, the body chemistry, the absorption of sugars, all these kind of things internally within the norms and their cognitive processes all interrelating. And somewhere between these two extremes, I think also of Larry Yeager's Polyworld, because he had at least a metabolism component to what he developed. This was my previous understanding of the Stewart-Kaufman distinction in terms of actually representing the internal components and looking at the chemistry and energy transfers internally within the agents. But what you seem to be describing is actually a third condition, which is where the movement interactions of the agents externally is used and described in almost thermodynamic principles in terms of the way some internalized energy is transferred into movement. Am I correct in that, or am I more on my original assumption?
No, I think that's a great way of stating it. One would be you'd be simulating the metabolism and energy flows and heat and work processes, whereas in the third approach would be you're kind of generalizing concepts of work and heat to apply to computational processes, and I think that's the trajectory that we're on, as opposed to just simulating it. We're trying to interpret agent models, and to kind of talk about, to give you maybe a one bit with this is this idea of a gradient. Systems extracting work from a gradient. So what we've noticed in a lot of our agent models is when you get the emergence of pattern or structure in these systems, it's heavily dependent on a gradient of some type that it's feeding off of. And we've been kind of working to identify, what does a gradient mean in a computational model. And just using two examples. One would be, say, a traffic jam model where you have drivers that are braking and accelerating. And one of the places, so we look at where is there asymmetries of interactions that can be imported into the final structure. So we're looking at the interaction rules and the boundary conditions, and looking for asymmetries in those descriptions that would define a computational gradient, and how those get translated into final pattern formation. So if you look at, say, a traffic jam where cars are moving and they're braking, and you get the emergence of a traffic jam that moves backwards, say, in the traffic flow. So if you look at one of the control variables in their control parameters would be how asymmetric is it, how much faster, basically they decelerate faster than they accelerate. The braking is much faster than acceleration. But if you relax that difference and them to more a symmetric deceleration and acceleration, you lose the emergent pattern. So we look at, for those kind of asymmetries in the interaction rules. Another would be a flocking model, say, where you have, and there's multiple ways of realizing a flocking model, but one classic way is having an area of repulsion and an area of attraction. And when those are when those are different, the repulsion is smaller than the attraction, then you get a nice flocking behavior. But if they're equal, then you lose that flock, right? So we're always looking at how asymmetries and, again, interaction rules lead and get imported into the final structure would be a perspective here.
And there are two parts to the simulation science problem. The first is are these models actually contributing back into new theories? And the second is, do you actually require a new kind of mathematics in order to describe these things that you're observing?
Right. So I think on the second question, a partner here, Owen Densmore, who's very, very interested in that kind of question. Can you formalize these models? And we don't. We're searching around. Is there something in, say, evolutionary theory, or is I'm not sure what the final solution will be, but I can tell you there's a lot of interest in that. Now, does it contribute to theories? That's an interesting. I don't have a good answer to that yet.
I think it's an interconnected problem. I mean, the argument that I made in Dick Gordon's book was that without a new mathematics, it will be very hard for simulation science to actually make productive mechanisms back into broader science, because you need a language in order to describe what you're talking about, but you need a level of formalization. Now, who knows if it'll look like mathematics? Who knows if it'll look more like sociology when it's done fundamentally. But I think the thing that's interesting with regards to tracking the developments of simulation science is, firstly, where will this language emerge from? What will its syntax be? But also, can there be some feedback into science, or offering back into something which goes on to be simulation science without this language first? And it's almost a kind of classic chicken-egg problem in terms of the stuff that you guys appear to be doing. In terms of, you mentioned you had a colleague that has this as a kind of primary interest. Do you get a sense of his particular surveying associated with this? Does he see a place where the new mathematics could be coming from, or does he really feel that it is as much his responsibility to create the new mathematics as anyone else's? Yeah,
I think he's been very interested in, first of all, mathematics, symbolic representation in computing, and just representing equations in computing. It's still the inability to send an equation across email in a non-trivial way is symptomatic of what he sees, I think, as there is a potential. There's a potential for a unifying between computation and mathematics. There's something kind of in that interstitial space. I'm not qualified to kind of to expand that further than that. He is, but I think it is related maybe to what I'm talking about with looking at a theory of pattern formation or self-organization, where if you think of that as later informing theory across many different disciplines. So I think this would be as much coming out of the theory, complex systems research as much as artificial life. I think there's a very strong union between the two.
Certainly.
So I think that would be my point. And I guess the second point I'd make with simulation science is kind of this metaphorically. If you think of computing in the 80s was all about computation. Agent-based modeling in a similar way started off all about computation. But as you saw the ubiquity of the web kind of explode in 94, 95, computing now is as much about communication as it is about computing an answer. And I think there may be a similar thing. It's certainly happening in agent-based modeling, where it is as much about communicating a system to the stakeholders and gaining insight as it is about prediction. And I would even argue it's more so about bringing together people around a common model.
Certainly.
And so I think simulation science is there's definitely going to be a role in the communication side as much as the computation.
So when you last came on Biota Live, you talked a little bit about simulating Venice, and certainly looking at the stuff, the traffic simulations and things that were on the SimTable website, similar kinds of issues. In terms of traffic simulation and motivation, this was certainly something that I saw in the late 90s that moved into the artificial life community, but not something that's typically now associated with artificial life. How do these simulation models relate to the artificial life, kind of contemporary artificial life community, and what kind of greater value can the artificial life community add to traffic models and these kind of problems?
So I think they share both artificial life community and we'll call it the simulation agent-based modeling community. They share agent-based modeling as a tool set, right? Now I think where artificial life could really contribute, and if we talk about this third approach, or this the Stuart Kauffman approach to artificial life, in contrast to the evolutionary computation has already made huge contributions to search and optimization and many operations research problems, right? But I think this other approach of the Stu Kauffman's autonomous agents, if we can start to understand systems as more from this living systems paradigm than a mechanical design, which is kind of almost a cliche in a lot of the business management books, but there is a theory of living systems that could be applied to to firms and social systems and cities themselves. And maybe it's going to just be metaphor, but perhaps it'll be a little bit stronger than that if you think of that these are systems that do need to detect gradients and extract work from them to persist and to reproduce. I think that would be a huge contribution from artificial life to give a theory of organization that is currently lacking in science. We don't really have those kind of theories to work from.
Certainly. I mean, my own experience modelling cities in the late 90s was that I drew from, in some regard, ideas that I had in quantum mechanics associated with waves and the way you could model economies, and also this notion of people moving into economic centres and then returning to residential centres are very much kind of abstract artificial life principles when mapped through these kind of models. So I agree. I think there's a lot the artificial life community can add to these things, but it does return to the problem in terms of kind of shared communication.
Could you say more about that, Tom? Just as the waves coming.
Okay, so
the quantum mechanics.
Okay, so the background with regards to Noble Ape was that I wanted to model a rich biological environment, and the idea that you could take, for example, where berries grew, where trees came out of rock faces, based on a series of quantum mechanical operations, land surface area fundamentally, but also rainfall, sunlight hitting, all these kind of things could be done based on initial wave function associated with, in an abstract fashion, the height of the island or landscape environment. And that biological simulation method proved very rich, particularly for the areas that I wanted to model in Noble Ape. And around, I guess, the late 90s, I was interested in doing a similar thing with regards to urban simulations. This idea, and we have Gerald Jung in the chat, and this echoes a lot of his contemporary stuff with architecture, but this idea that the shapes in artificial life in biological environments could also be applied to urban environments, and in building, modelling, in the layouts of houses, and these kind of things, by taking things that have been previously modelled in a biological simulation sense and moving them into things that were more applicable to urban environments. So what I did was took the biological simulation based on quantum mechanics in Noble Ape, where there was a stationary land wave function, obviously moving light-related ones, and moved it into cities where there were clearly economic wave functions. There was a stationary land wave function, and also this idea of kind of residential centres, which were almost secondary wave functions against the economic ones. And through modelling both the stationary and active wave functions, and then, as you say, applying gradients, which are typically roads are in tangent to these gradients, with regards to the landform, but you can also do it in terms of the economic and the other aspects that you're modelling. And this is the interesting thing with roads, is there's not just landform, it's also economic. If you model the economy as a wave function, you can do roads with similar modelling. So it was taking the biological modelling methods that I've developed in Noble Ape and moving them into modelling cities. And what I found in parallel was that there was a group in Berlin that was doing something similar with regards to shopping patterns through Berlin, and they had an economic wave function model as well that they were using. So I found that what was fascinating, and this is echoed through Biota Lives previously. We've had people on that have had backgrounds with artificial life of plants and also putting plant-like structures into games. And the point that I've always made back to them is a lot of this is also applicable to things like city simulation, and also we have Bruce Damer on periodically, and he does simulation for NASA with regards to planetary simulation. And I think as the futurists get more and more involved with NASA, and particularly projections, you can use a lot of these fundamental artificial life methods, or things that are developed with Noble Ape and other folks have developed in their artificial life simulations for a wide variety of problems. So has that answered your question?
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you.
And what fascinates me about what you're doing is that it seems that you're picking up on aspects of this in mapping it back to agents. And this is the thing that fascinated me with the folk in Berlin, was that I guess there were agents in the stuff that I was simulating for cityscapes. Initially, it was just the cityscapes and the movement of traffic in flow. But distilling it down to agents and using similar principles, I think, is a fascinating process. The principles that we've developed with regards to, in my case, using quantum mechanics wave functions as means as operators in these experiments, these are things that need to kind of flow back into the broader discussion. And I think what interests me with regards to agent-based modeling in particular is that it's picked up by sociology, psychology, and used to kind of filter back into their disciplines as well. And this is the thing that interests me with regards to simulation sciences. It's not just talking back to the sciences or offering modeling methods to the sciences. It's something which actually flows, I guess one may consider in this country at least the social sciences as part of the sciences as well. So very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff.
Just kind of maybe a follow-up to your point on the quantum mechanics. So I think if you think of thermodynamics as kind of coming around from last century, and just in my thinking, just trying to import that into agent modeling. At some of the agent conferences, I've heard people trying to interpret maybe from a quantum mechanics viewpoint, which I'm certainly no expert in. But I find it interesting in Kaufman's latest book, he's starting to lean into the direction as well. So I just, this reinventing the sacred, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that yet, which is kind of trying to, I think, have a rational discussion, or saying there's kind of a middle way between neo-Darwinism and kind of intelligent design. So there's something kind of there's a dialogue to be had kind of in the middle there.
That was Dick Gordon's book. Fundamentally, we have Dick Gordon in the chat. He produced a book which was a series of papers and dialogues last year called Divine Action and Natural Selection, and that is fundamentally what came through his book as well.
Oh, excellent! I'll pick that up. So do you see? Is there some movement with looking at quantum mechanics and artificial life in the same way that I'm talking about thermodynamics and artificial life?
I mean, in a historical context, I started developing Noble Ape in the mid-90s, and when I started developing it, it wasn't even considered artificial life. I mean, it was very much more the conservative terminology in your original discussion today. So, I mean, when I started developing it, and still it gets raised eyebrows, there just isn't a popular understanding with regards to these things. I mean, I think the teaching of quantum mechanics in particular, I had academics that refused to use computers when they taught quantum mechanics, and, my own perspective with regards to visualization would have probably made it more preferable if I had computers to actually see these wave functions and how they evolve. But you're right, it is very much part of the same lineage as thermodynamics, both philosophically and in terms of the minds involved with it. I think it's an ongoing process. I mean, what interests me with regards to the idea of a kind of unified simulation science is that we can throw these ideas directly into the mix at that level and start saying, actually, there are ways to use these methodologies, these approaches that were developed very tightly with regards to, modeling heat and work and these kind of things in other areas. And I think the benefit that we have with simulation sciences is we can actually show in a very demonstrable way the way these things are applied. I think also with regards to Noble Ape cognitive simulation, there was a similar thing at the time, using ideas of information transfer through bacterial models and these kind of things seemed very abstract, but it was peer-reviewed and academically published last year. What you see is a very interesting delta. There is a delta between when these ideas first percolate through the artificial life community and through other communities, and then probably, I'd hate to say it, 15 and 20 years, and then they become part of the mainstream. So maybe we are still riding this vanguard with regards to simulation science in particular. But I think these things are very compelling, and they're particularly compelling through demonstration. It's one thing to talk about these things, to write down formulae, but when you show these things in simulation, when you show them in a setting that anyone can see and then you discuss and go through the necessary critiquing, it moves from being something which is very abstract and somewhat alien to being something which people can be quite receptive to. And when I say people here, I mean the broader scientific community as well.
Right, and I think that's one of the contributions that maybe when you mention simulation science or the relationship, you're looking for new mathematics of computation or simulation. One of the things we definitely see is, if you look at enough models, agent models in particular, and you go to enough conferences, you start to almost blank out on what people are labeling as their agents, and you really just start watching kind of what are the interaction rules. and again, going back to what are the asymmetries and the interactions and what are the final patterns, and you don't really care too much about the actual semantics of the model, which are in some cases just kind of layered on top. In much the way in mathematics, say if you see a 1 over x squared a whole bunch of times, you don't really care what the x is. You know, you're going to know what the outcome is going to be.
Certainly.
And I think the same thing that simulation science is one of the contributions is, you know, if you see an Ising model in physics and a voting model in sociology, you know, where you're looking at your neighbors and going with the majority, or staying out of the majority in another case, you know that that's the same model, right? And so as soon as we get better languages to describe our models, I think there's a benefit to say, you guys need to be talking. The sociologist needs to be talking to the physicist, or an ant foraging model. It's the same as a lightning channel, for charge dissipation. So, plasma physicists and now an entomologist can be talking together because the models are equivalent, right? So as soon as we can, improve that kind of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary kind of approaches, modeling is that language that mathematics, I think, has served that role, and I think simulation has that potential to be that bridge to let different disciplines see that they're dealing with. It's pretty much the same kind of pattern formation, albeit in a different substrate.
Yes, no, that's my hope too, and I mean I'm very pleased to be a participant in this discussion because I think artificial life has a lot to offer, and certainly when I started developing Noble Ape, it was very much based in the idea that these boundaries existed and these boundaries needed to be broken down in order to make any kind of meaningful change. And I think certainly that's what you're echoing as well. In terms of the broader artificial life community, based on the fact that Biota Lab has listened to a wide variety of people, academics, hobbyists, people that have a broader interest in artificial life, expert users, these kind of things, what more would you like to see from the artificial life community?
Yeah, I think last week I mentioned just tool sets, better tool sets, maybe common tools to use. Continuing to push out the definition of what is a living system, refining that, and then getting simulation and getting measures of living systems, and I think that it's one of these questions that we'll keep pushing out as our definition gets a little bit more and more complex or sophisticated. So I keep pushing the definitions and challenging folks to get it instantiated in the software side. So I'm more on the soft side than the wet side. So that would be my keep moving in that direction.
Do you think there's going to be a broader unification of the term artificial life with regards to wet, soft, and hard in the foreseeable future, or do you think they're going to continue to diverge?
No, I think they'll. I hope and I suspect they'll become much more unified and I think it's a bit more with is there a stronger definitions or consensus on what is a living system, and I know there's others that will say, well, that's not. Even the question is posed incorrectly, but I think as it moves away from the evolutionary computation definitions and more into kind of this pattern formation and kind of Kaufman's definitions as one potential, I think there's a stronger potential for unification. Terrific.
Well, Stephen, it's been a somewhat impromptu, somewhat multi-directional Biota Live, but I'd like to thank you for the chance to chat today, and I'm sure you're going to participate in future Biota Lives, and also I really look forward to continuing to work with you through the work group. And for folks who are interested in participating in the work group, go to the Biota website, biota.org/podcast. There'll be a link through to the work group. We are growing in numbers in the work group. However, I would like to emphasize the fact that it is a work group. There is stuff that's going to be going on through the work group that will require probably between half an hour to an hour, maybe every week, maybe every other week, and particularly when we look at the courseless surveying, the need for people to actively participate and actually go through courses, to contact academics and to get a broader sense of the surveying is really needed through the work group currently. But it is a wonderful opportunity for you to extend your own listening interest to Biota Live and actually get a sense of what's going on the ground. And certainly, Stephen, you've provided that today. So thank you very much for the chance to chat with you.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to everyone else out there. Thank you.
I kick it root down, I put my root down. I kick it root down, I put my root down. So how we gonna kick it? Gonna kick it root down. Yeah, how you wanna kick it? Gonna kick it root down. So how you gonna kick it? Gonna kick it root down. Gonna break it all down, gonna kick it root down. It's not a put down, I put my foot down. And then I make some love, I put my root down. I'm like Sweetie Pie by the Stone Alliance. Everybody know I'm known for dropping science. Some electric like Dick Hyman. I guess you'd expect to cast a crew rhyming. Never let you down with the stereo sound. So what? Get on the mic and turn it on. I'm talking root down, I put my boot down. And if you wanna battle me, you put loot down. I tell this root down, it's time to screw down. And I'ma step up to the mic and my goose down. I come up representing from the upper west. Money making, putting me to the test. And sometimes I feel as though I've been blessed because I'm doing what I want. So I never rest. I ain't going now, goofy like the front of the boom guy. Just strutting like the meters with the boogity papa. Downtown, Brooklyn is where I was born. But when the snow is falling, then I am gone. And you might think that I'm a fanatic. A phone call from you, tired of throwing a panic. She break it to the root when we kick it all down. To the business, my man, I wanna get I kick it root down, I put my root down. I kick it root down, I put my root down. So how you wanna kick it? Gonna kick it root down. So how we gonna kick it? We're gonna kick it root down. So how we gonna kick it? Gonna kick it root down. We're gonna break it all down, gonna kick it root down. Yeah. Will that rock, huh? Or don't stop? Or just get on the mic with the tick in the top. And while I bring it to the beat, I'll rip like brim. I'm walking down the block and you say that's him. There goes that guy with the funky sound. The beat say boys, you know we're gonna get down. Because I got the flow where I grab my neck, say, oh my God, that's the funk. Hey shit, so I'ma pass the mic and cause a panic. The original nasal kid is doing damage. Took the train to the high street station, doing homework on the train. What a fucking situation. Way back up there in battle days, I threw the underground underneath the skyscraper. It's like Harlem World battles on the Zulu Beat show. It's cool with D, was busy me, that's one you should know. Enough of that, just wanna give some respect to NCA. Grab the mic and my bell will connect you. Marley was a prophet for the freedom fight. If there's a praise through the Lord, then I will feel alright. I'm feeling good to play a good music. A tears running down my face, cause I love to do it. And no one can stop this flow from flowing on. The flow master of disaster with the sound is gone. Take a little shout out to my dad and mom for bringing me into this world of sound. I kick it root down, I put my root down. I kick it root down, I put my root down. So how we gonna kick it? Gonna kick it root down. Yeah, how you wanna kick it? Gonna kick it root down. So how we gonna rock it? Gonna kick it root down.